Story Spinners of Grand Rapids started in 1970. Chris McDonald, who is now the kind of co-founder of Master Arts Theater, came in from California to Michigan and was so touched and inspired by the storytelling community in California that she wanted to bring it here to Grand Rapids. And on one of those, January blizzard, middle of winter, thick crusted with ice days, they all met at the old Howard Johnson's on 28th Street, and they founded Story Spinners of Grand Rapids. We are currently an affiliate yet to this day of the National Storytelling Network, and we are a local guild and basically a group that comes together to share stories, to share the art form of stories, and to continue and build that tradition. We hear people talk about stories all the time, and by the fact of we as people, we're constantly sharing our story. We get home at the end of the day, we can hardly wait to tell our friend, our spouse, our children, the events that happened of the day. And that is a story. Many things that we call stories are antecedents, these little excerpts of visual images that happened along the way. So by our nature, we as people are storytellers. We think in story, we think in imagery. We are hardwired. That is who we are. And that really, in many ways, sets us apart from all other creatures. But when we talk about the art form of storytelling, we take those events of the day and they're specifically crafted. And so it is an art. It is a specific process. I would say most of our storytellers tell traditional folk tales, those legends, myths, folklore that have been well crafted through the century of time and that have so touched people's lives that they're still being told today. In those stories, we find every single human condition ever known to humankind, and they're still relevant, and they're still alive, and they're still touching people centuries and centuries later. And it's such an honor to be continuing that tradition and keeping those stories alive, because the only way those stories will stay alive is if we keep telling them.
Well, my name is Andrea Nightingale, and I am board chair of Story Spinners of Grand Rapids, and I've always loved stories ever since I was a little girl, and stories have been a part of my life and a part of who I am and what I do.
My switch over from kind of being the person who was a voice for people who couldn't be a voice was one of my initial start outs with storytelling. And then it was when my daughter was 4 years old, it was one of those stressed out mom days. Got to find something to do. I love my child, but I need a little time here. And we found Story Spinners of Grand Rapids. They were doing a spring concert, and so I thought, cool, storytelling. Didn't know anything about it, but it sounded great. She was absolutely enthusiastic, sat down in the center aisle in front, and I sat in the back.
And I sat in the front and I just watched in awe and excitement as they told these incredible stories. And well, it kind of snuck into intermission, and I went up and introduced myself to the MC and said that I was going to be their special guest storyteller for the night.
And after the intermission, the next thing I heard, we have a special guest storyteller, and her name is Andrea Nightingale, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's my 4-year-old daughter. I'm now sitting bolt upright, and even over my beating heart, she told a story where she magically wove parts and pieces of the stories she had heard that evening. The group was so impressed by what she had done. They invited her to festival, and she did a half-an-hour storytelling performance, but that was a little bit much at 5 years old, so I came in to help her out. So that was a second turning point for me.
Well, I began as a young storyteller, and I found ballet, and I fell in love. I went to a workshop when I was 7 years old, and I got to be Claire from the Nutcracker, and I loved the story that was behind the ballet, and I loved the movements of the ballet.
She walked off stage after being a part of that story and out of that workshop. She came up to me and she says, "Mom, I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to dance." And I said, "Yeah, cool, great." A month later, she came back to me and she says, "Mom, I can't imagine a day in my life without dance."
And what I love to do is I love to create stories with my movements and combine them with actual retelling of stories and being able to just bring that story to a completely different light with the movement.
And at that point, I was really starting to work at storytelling and looking at it a different way. I had gone through a few workshops, and she decided she didn't want to tell stories, but she says, "Mom, I see dance, it's a story." And she gathered a group of dancers together. She invited me to tell in her dance classes, and actually started to develop dance moves and steps off from it. And it's through her gift of story that I truly believe she understands it better than I do, in her coaching of me, that we began to work together, and she would see parts of the stories and help me craft them.
When we create a story and dance combo, we go through a couple of different processes. Sometimes it's just all of a sudden the ideas are going like crazy, and bam, you have the whole thing right there in front of you. Other times we come together and we start with an image, the image of the story, and how the dance fits into the story. How can it best fill out the story and give maybe some visual clues, whether it's actually being a dance company or whether it's being clouds in the sky.
In the role of a storyteller, whether it's a coaching bud, whether it's my daughter who has coached me and listened endless hours as I muddle through and grow and develop a story, or that commissioned, that paid performance where you walk out on stage and you're announced as the storyteller. I guess when I look out at whatever audience, I'm one in complete honor that I am able to share, and not only share, but in the art of storytelling, as Doug Lippman so masterfully points out, that you talk about the storyteller, but it's really not about the storyteller, it's about the listeners that have come to join you, because a story is not a story without a listener. And in the art of storytelling, it's completely interactive.
And I love to be able to make the audience smile or laugh and cry, and I always love to be able to see how they reacted, and after a performance I want to hear what they thought and how it came off from my point of view and how it looked to them.
I really appreciate the words of master storyteller Donald Davis, where he says, you know, as a storyteller, you're a tour guide. And what you're doing is inviting the audience to come along to a place that you've been many times before, but they may have never been. And in story, we present images. We don't have bold letters, italicized words, tables of content, pictures, bar graphs that literature has to present their information. We have right now, at this moment, with this audience. And as a storyteller, each time you tell a story, it'll come out a little bit different. And it's because of that relationship with the audience. You come together and you craft and form the story in a new way. And it is an honor to walk out and to connect with people in the audience that are willing, as you develop that relationship, to come along with you on this tour of vivid images and life-changing happenings.